Hey, Eric, I thought you were joining.
I'm just gonna listen while I'm working on other things.
Cool.
Can everybody hear me okay?
Sure can. Hello.
Awesome. Hey,
Looking very nice today.
thanks.
No.
So Katie or Taylor, do you know how this works? So when I share, so my screen's going to take over the sharing. Do you, isn't there that new feature where you can like have the video overlay so you have at least so it's you see me talking to the slides also?
I believe you're on the side in like a little box so people can see
Okay.
you and your
Oh, good.
presentation.
Okay, gotcha.
Katie, you can spotlight Brandon too.
Yeah, so I'll do that as well.
So I'm always drinking caribou. We should have caribou sponsor our webinars.
That would be nice. Free coffee for everyone. All right, we'll give another minute or so and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, it's 11 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started as people are still trickling in. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the third installment of our Microsoft 365 webinar series. I'm Katie, a Successes Marketing Specialist, and today we will be hearing from our Chief Technology Officer and a certified ethical hacker, Brandon Nohr. He will be presenting on Zero Trust security and how the Microsoft 365 security components kind of work together to secure your remote and hybrid work. So just before we get started, a couple housekeeping things. Brandon will have time for questions throughout his presentation, so hold on to those and there will be spots where you can ask them. Then at the very end, we will also be doing a giveaway. So 3 people will be going away with a Lenovo headset, a Lenovo keyboard, or a Lenovo speakerphone. So stick around, I'll be announcing those winners. Without further ado, though, I will give the floor to Brandon. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. So let me share my screen right away. We'll just get this started. Go. Let's see, can I see people? Big question, right? Yes. All right. Gotcha. Everything's set. So like Katie said, we're going to talk a little bit about Zero Trust today. And this is a little different from the other discussions we've had. If you've joined the other M365 discussions, those were really targeted towards just what M365 suite could do. Here, zero trust is a little bit bigger than that, and then we'll kind of come down into the M365 suite. So we'll start with kind of security in general, thinking a little bit more conceptual, logical, and physical, if you will. So we'll start with kind of state of the state, why we need to care about this. We'll define zero trust a little bit and how it fits into a security program or framework. And then we'll kind of dive into, well, what does that mean in M365? It was interesting putting this together. It's such a big topic, and even within the M365 framework, it's a big topic. So don't expect to walk away with this from a perspective of, I know what to do now. Hopefully my goal here is really just to introduce you to some of the concepts, some of the thinking, and then at the end, you at least walk away with some, at least a little bit better knowledge of, here are the pieces I would look at if I were going to go implement some of these things. So if we can fast forward here. Of course not. What's going on? There we go. So a little bit about me. Been with Success going on 17 years or so. Been in the business, IT business, 27 years. As you can see in the gray in my beard, it's not an easy business to be in. It gets a little stressful sometimes. But a lot of my role here is really looking at relevancy. If I was going to boil it down to one thing, I look at what we're doing today and look down the road. What are we relevant to our clients? Are we going to stay relevant? What do we need to do to stay relevant? And it was about 7-8 years ago now, we looked at security, and it was pretty apparent from an MSP perspective it was going to change, and MSPs really needed to dive a little bit deeper into security. So we dove pretty early on into security, and I've been focused in that last time frame on building our security practice with a really great team behind me. So I like to kind of start this a little bit even higher level than zero trust. Let's start at, what is security? And I love that we have a lot of people here. We have some people willing to be on camera. That really helps in this remote world we live in. If anybody wants to chime in, maybe give an example of what does security mean to you, that'd be great. I'll give you a second to raise your hand. Please participate if you can. Ryan.
Hello, hello. Long time no see.
Good to see you.
Good to see you again, as always. I think that, if you're just asking what is security, I think, and kind of tying into what you said a moment ago about staying relevant, I think that it's an ever-changing landscape. I think that there are, as with ever-changing threats, there are ever-changing controls. So I know that currently at our company, we're taking a really hard look at some of the RBAC, or the role-based access controls, and privileged identity management, because the idea is you can assume somebody's safe today, but you can't assume they're safe tomorrow. So how do you stay on top of that is kind of, how I view security currently.
Awesome. That's a great definition. Anybody else want to chime in? That's okay. For our discussion today, I'll kind of narrow it a little bit and kind of define it. Now, what Ryan said is exactly it, is it's ever changing. So you can't just put something in the ground and expect it to be good tomorrow, right? But for our discussion here, I think we'll kind of define it as risk management. And I think ultimately, if you look at it from this lens, back to what Ryan was saying, it will always be that if I'm looking at it from a risk management perspective, what was good may not be still good. And so what is the risk of keeping that in place, and what is the benefit or potential new risks of implementing something new, right? And I think the easiest example when I think about risk management is if I have a risk, a vulnerability, whatever that is in my organization, that is a $50,000 risk, but it's going to cost me $1 million to fix. The likelihood of me fixing that's pretty low. The return on that investment doesn't make sense. But if you flip that, if it's $1 million risk and a $50,000 investment, you'll probably do that all day long. So if we think about it from a risk management perspective, it really helps us from the lens of, where do we spend our money? And if you think about SMB, small businesses, we don't have endless money to spend on security. So let's look to the things that we do spend money on to give a high value return, because we can spend money all day long on things that don't give a high value in that return, and maybe even still check a box in compliance. The other thing I like to talk about to kind of level set is myths. And so we hear this all the time. These are things I hear when I talk to clients and prospects is, my data's in the cloud, it's safe. And you'll kind of see today where that could be true, but it depends on how you set it up. I have nothing to lose. I'm a small business. Why do they want me? Go after, the big dogs. They have more money, but that's not necessarily true. You have a lot of data. You have access to other companies and money too. Nothing we're stealing. The best one though that I've been hearing lately is I have cybersecurity insurance. I have cyber insurance, so I'm fine. And I want to be really clear here that I've been involved in a number of incidents, and that we've had to work with insurance companies. And please only think of cyber insurance as that is our last hope to recover anything, because they're not there to help you. And if there isn't any insurance people on here, I'm sorry, but they're not really there to help you. They're there to make sure that they deliver to the letter of the policy. And you're going to have to prove and spend a lot of time proving what is included in that letter of the policy. So just be cautious about thinking cybersecurity insurance is the solution here. So let's kind of talk a little bit about the SMBs and why security matters to us. And I went out, I had a bunch of old data in some of my slides. So for this, I went out and got some new data, and it's actually kind of staggering. In 2022, 76% of organizations were targeted by a ransomware attack. That doesn't mean it was successful, but they were targeted. That felt a little low because it feels like everybody's targeted every day. But what I will tell you is 70% of all breaches are small businesses. So the majority of breaches, the majority of what attackers are going after and getting are small businesses. So that's why it really matters to us to pay attention to this. Someone have a question? I think someone's not on mute. That's okay. Perfect. Thank you. So the next one here, cybercrime caused $6 trillion in damage in 2022. That's hard to get your mind around. That makes me feel I'm on the wrong side of this. That's not true. I'm an ethical person, but kind of makes you feel like you might be on the wrong side of this. Oops. Get back into mode here. Now this one is going to link to some of the things we're going to talk about a little bit later, but more than 33 billion accounts will be breached by cyber criminals by the end of 2023. This is one of the things that it's so easy for them to get. They go on the dark web, they buy some credentials, and if you're not properly managing your identities, they can get right into your accounts, account takeovers. Sometimes they'll even trick your users. They'll send them a link, and they'll say, "Oh, hey, change your password here," and they enter the password. It doesn't work, and they just kind of close it and forget about it. Well, now they have the credentials, and if you're not protecting the identities appropriately, it's not hard for the criminals to get into your accounts and take over. And we'll kind of talk. This links to that whole identity thing later. So the other piece here, laggy here for some reason. Sorry about this. Me and PowerPoint aren't getting along. Give me a second. Dun, dun, dun. If I could juggle, I would. Let's try this again. All right, back in business. Turn off those, you can hear me. I think that one of the themes I want you to take away here is that don't do it alone. When we designed our security practice, it wasn't me and my security team in a room going, "Hey, what can we sell?" Or what's the easiest thing for us to do? a lot of clients that I talk to, or even prospects that I talk to, and I'll say, well, why did you buy this? Or why did you do this? And they were like, well, we were told to, or this other company did it, so it seemed like we should do it. Or, you know, the old one was expired and I just replaced it, and without really rethinking the strategy. Kind of back to Ryan's point, is like, is it even still what we should be doing, right? So don't go it alone. Really think about it from a perspective of strategy and subscribe to a framework. That's the number one thing I can have you to walk away with today, is subscribe to a framework. And there's a couple that we really like. NIST, the cybersecurity framework from NIST is really great. The identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, really great pillars, categories for how to think about your investments and getting really good return on those investments. The other one we really like, and if you've talked to me for more than 5 minutes, I've probably mentioned this, is CIS controls. The reason we like CIS controls a little bit over NIST, one, they're influenced by NIST, so NIST kind of has its fingerprints all over it anyways, but it's a little bit more prescriptive, and it kind of it kind of wraps the controls into what they call these implementation groups, so it makes it a little easier to know what to do and how to kind of create a roadmap to it. So we really like the CIS controls for that. But again, it's a framework. It's giving you direction. It's not you trying to figure out what to do. So I like to kind of go back a little bit, because when we talk about M365 and some of the zero trust and how that applies, we have to understand how we got to where we're at, and or at least that we're at where we're at in the legacy, what Microsoft calls legacy, which most companies have. So I don't know how legacy it is yet, but it's on its way to legacy. And so when we think about this, it's really about when, and I've been in IT now since '97. So back in '97, when I started in IT, we bring everybody inside the four walls, right? And we kind of, what, call it the walled garden, call it the castle and moat, but we bring them inside the four walls of the business. We'd connect an internet connection. We'd have a firewall that would have some services on it, like gateway antivirus, reputation-based services, those types of things, to make sure that anybody inside the four walls was, trusted and protected. And when they would try to leave the four walls, through browsing or whatever that is, the firewall would look at, oh, hey, this is good, this is bad, don't go here, go here. And that was great, because now we have a really nice protected, kind of walled garden is kind of the term I like. But as success, we would talk about these four walls. But in the sense that now, mobile first, cloud first kind of world, that's changed, right? We're not in this walled garden anymore. We have a lot of walled gardens. We probably have multiple walled gardens now, right? We might have a data center, an office, a bunch of homes, right? And it looks kind of more like this, right? Everything's outside the four walls. And our goal was, especially in 2022 or 2020, when we all went remote, we kind of started extending our walled garden. Well, I'm going to connect you through a VPN, and I'm going to connect you through, maybe we had a cloud service or something, but it's all separate, right? It's not really nice and neat. And what did we lose? When we look at this, the biggest thing we lost was visibility. When we were in our walled garden, we had visibility. We could see what was going on. We had logs from our firewall, we had alerts, we had all that. But when everything went remote, we lost that visibility. And so when we think about it from a perspective of, I had a certain set of visibility. Now that everything's outside the four walls, from a design goal, we want that same visibility. But visibility isn't the only thing we need, right? Because, Target's the prime example. We look at Target, and everybody brings up Target, I get it. But it's a prime example of, they knew they were breached. They just didn't have the insight to know they were breached. The data was there, but it was too noisy. So if you have visibility without the insight, it's just noise, right? It's almost worthless to even have. So as we kind of transition now into like defining zero trust and how it fits, just keep some of these things in mind. It's about visibility and insight. It's about understanding what good looks like using a framework, right? So let's kind of keep those things in mind as we move forward here. I'm going to pause before we move on. Does anybody have any questions, any feedback? Wait a second. Does it all make sense? Oh, we have one. Nick?
Does all of this zero trust and all this stuff that you're moving forward to, does this also pertain to like a GCC or category 2-3 tendency as well? Or is that going to be a little bit different? The government cloud?
So yeah. So yes. So the if you're talking Microsoft and you're talking the government cloud, yes. The biggest differences there is sovereignty. The government cloud, it has to be in certain sovereignty. So that's generally the biggest difference, is it's not outside of the US. And so that's part of the government cloud difference there. And there's some other ones, but that's the biggest difference. But otherwise, from a functionality standpoint, I believe most of it will apply, at least what we're talking about today.
Perfect.
The other thing I thought you might be asking is around Google, like how does this apply to Google? And Google's is around Beyond Corp is what they call it. Very similar structure. I do not claim to be an expert there. I wouldn't be able to answer any questions from a Google perspective, but if you're in the Google world, the translation would be the Beyond Corp is what their solutions are. Anybody else have any questions? Realize I can't see everybody. Okay. All right, cool. Moving on. Feel free to jump in too if you have any questions. All right, so let's define zero trust a little bit. And I think the first misconception, well, one, it's the biggest marketing term out there right now. Sorry, Taylor and Katie. It's one of the biggest marketing terms out there right now. Everybody's using the term zero trust, and it's fairly ill-defined. Now, NIST does have a white paper on zero trust, and it's 800-207, I think, is the paper. If you're having trouble sleeping, go ahead and read it. But overall, we'll kind of get to the core of what it's saying, and we're more focused on the Microsoft interpretation of it, anyways. But when I think about zero trust, I think in terms of some layers, and we'll kind of talk through those layers. And but the way Microsoft thinks about it is it's about verify explicitly, least privilege, and assume breach. So let's kind of break these down a little bit. Verify explicitly, and this kind of goes back to our walled garden. What we used to do is when we came into our walled garden, we'd log into our Active Directory and we'd be all happy because we're set up. There was only really one time that really kind of verified who you were, and then you had a token, then you can kind of move around the network as you know, as you please. If something changed on the network, how many? I mean, it sounds like there's some admins on here. How many times? Oh yeah, I don't have access to that. Okay, well log out, log back in. You know, it's that kind of thing. This isn't necessarily that. For the most part, there's some caveats to it, but the verify explicitly is when you're accessing something, it's verifying who you are. So it's not just, oh, I have a token and then I have free access everywhere. Every document, every click, everything that you're doing is verified. That's the idea with explicitly. Least privilege is I'm always operating with the least amount of privileges. Now there's ways to elevate privileges, and you know, you can elevate to have control over other areas. You can even elevate to admin privileges. The number one thing out of the least privilege, that, especially if I have admins on here, the number one thing I want you to take away is do not run day-to-day as global admin or local admin or domain admin. Have a normal user and then elevate to a separate account if need be. Now, there's other ways to do that with privilege. You know, Ryan even mentioned it, privileged access management, privileged identity management. There's other ways to kind of do that, but the simplest and the fastest way, just make yourself a normal user and create an admin account, so at least you have separation of rights there, so that if your normal user is compromised, they're not going to get the keys to the kingdom. The assumed breach is kind of goes hand in hand with the verify explicitly, but everything is an adversary until proven otherwise. And then go back to the walled garden. That's not the way that we looked there. Everybody was trusted until proven otherwise. If I plugged into a network port, I'm on the network, I can do whatever I want until proven otherwise. If I, have access to a particular directory, but then my account is compromised, nothing's verifying that and removing my access, right? It's that assumed breach. And so when we think about zero trust and how Microsoft implements that, it's all about real time. If an account is has some risky behavior. So I'll give you an example. If I'm working, and then all of a sudden someone tries to log in or successfully logs in from Russia, all of a sudden my account is in a risky state, and it will prompt me for MFA to change my password. Depending on how you've set that up, there's policies you can put in place to do that. Does it make sense? I know this is a big topic, a big slide. Any questions on how this applies? Oh, Brian.
I do just have one easy thing to add to piggyback off of you said. If you're going to take away one thing from here is have a separate account from your day-to-day. That's something Success recommended for us quite a long time ago. It's when we're working with vendors, it's been something that complimented us, like, oh, that's an easy thing to adopt. The easiest way to do that, at least from transitioning from if your day-to-day account is currently the global admin or domain admin, enterprise admin, that kind of thing, is transition away from that, still have a normal user type account for your stuff, but then really leverage private browsing. So if you get in that situation and it's like, oh crap, I just need to make a quick change, I can't do it as my day-to-day, a private browser is your best friend. You can get in, do what you need to do. There's no token that's saved at the end. You close out of the window, you're good to go. That for me was an easy way to kind of adopt this idea of my day-to-day account can't have all the privileges. So
yeah, that's a great point. It's because I know it's a barrier, right? And that's the biggest thing we hear is kind of just slows me down. And I think that's a great tip for making it a reality. So that's awesome. Anyone else have feedback or questions? So now we'll kind of pivot a little bit into focusing a little bit more on Microsoft and how Microsoft thinks about zero trust. And I'm going to provide a little example of a roadmap. And I say example because the roadmap can change quite a bit depending on your environment, but this is an example. The one thing that probably won't change is you almost always start, and I only say almost because I hate saying never, but you almost always start with identity. Whether you move email first, whether you move SharePoint, whether you start with Teams or OneDrive, all of that, it starts with an identity in the cloud in M365. And that identity from M365 is the exact same identity. It's all managed through Azure AD. And so you're going to start with identity. And the best thing you can do there is enforce multi-factor. Now, I believe Microsoft is enforcing that on new tenancies by default now, but old tenancies I don't think are grandfathered into that. So just if you haven't turned on multi-factor, do it. And I'll even show you kind of the policy to do it in. So multi-factor is the key there. The other piece to identity is once you start to get into identity, you can already start to take advantage of risk analysis and also doing behavioral analysis. Even though it'll be later in the roadmap, you can start with identity right away. You can build policies to enforce MFA or enforce password resets or certain things like that, or geo location filtering, right? You can't log in if you're outside the US, those type of things. The second one that you kind of, I would suggest getting into, and you'll see why in a little bit, is device management. Get control of the identity, get control of the device. And although this is kind of top down, it's really the foundation to how you build the rest of everything else. All the data, all the policies, everything builds off of identity and devices. And so that is the foundation to the zero trust framework, especially from the Microsoft side. There's other pieces, and you'll see kind of how Microsoft prioritizes a little bit, but that's really where you start. The next one, and this one is the scarier and harder one to kind of solve. There's some vendors out there that do it really well. Microsoft does it okay. I'll just say that. It does it okay. So look to Microsoft, test it, but other vendors are a little bit easier to work with. And what I mean by application control, that is when you think about zero trust, again, verify explicitly, right? It's nothing in my organization can run without me knowing that it's good. So think about your organization today. You probably let any application run until it's found to be bad, right? This is the opposite of that. No application can run unless it's known to be good. And if you're an admin and you've been working this business long enough, that is a scary thing to think about, right? It's how many users are going to be locked out. So that's why I say there's vendors out there that do it really well. Microsoft does it okay. It's getting better and better. But the idea here is application control. Only allow things that are known to be good run on your environment. Behavioral analysis, you can start to layer in all the goodness. Now I have control over identity, device management specifically. I can layer in the good policies, good, and we'll get to conditional access later, but conditional access, understand that when something's going bad, it's going to take action, right? If someone's account is believed to be compromised, you can be alerted to that and take action on it. And then data. When you think about data, it's really around the classification. And then when you start to get to the classification of data, unless you're in like healthcare, most companies aren't really thinking about that too much. You might have some classifications from executive level to it's almost like classified and company-wide and then public, really. But if you're in healthcare, there's probably a little bit more nuance there, financial too. But the idea is you're starting to understand what types of data there are in your organization and classifying it, and then you can take different action based on that because you have control of, surprise, identity and device, right? Then lastly here, it's the automation to it all. I can automatically, based on other criteria or what's going on in the organization, take advantage or I can look at a document for an example and say, oh, there's a social security number that's now encrypted and now private information. There's a credit card now encrypted and private information. There is ways you can automate these things and take advantage of the kind of that power of the rights management and cloud. That's definitely more of an advance. This roadmap if I were to look at this roadmap, this is probably a 12 to 24 month roadmap that you're looking at. You could go faster, but the dirty secret in security is that it's not the technology that can't go faster, it's our users who can't change fast enough, right? So we have to be cognizant of our users and their ability to change, right? Okay, we kind of defined the zero trust roadmap, defined zero trust. Any questions? We're going to move into kind of some design goals and looking at Microsoft and some of the policies and how we would build those.
I have one thing, and I know I keep talking, so I don't want to be
Please
that
do.
guy.
Great.
No, so I think some of the struggles or some of the not really struggles, but the hard things to kind of work through at our company, at least, when you talk about device management and you're talking about, we're a hybrid setup, and so you obviously you can leverage Endpoint Manager, Intune as it was called, to really start to leverage some of the stronger device management controls. We have to at least have a solid understanding of the application control. So you can say, we're not going to let people use their personal devices anymore. Well, you can say that, but if the end goal is to let them use Teams or Outlook on a personal device, you have to have that application control in place before you start restricting the devices. So that's kind of where we're at today, and what I'm looking forward to. I don't know if it's in the scope of this call, but looking at the conditional access policies and just kind of getting your general recommendations around that topic.
That's a really great point, and it is spot on. Where this isn't, it's easier than it's ever been, but it's not easy, right? There's a lot of considerations when you're implementing these controls. And so we'll touch on really my goal here is to introduce the concepts of the policies and how they kind of work together, and maybe even introduce kind of a little bit of the experience around that. But we won't go too deep into what that is. But if you have questions, ask them and we can see if it fits or not. All right. So let's move on to the design goal. And there's probably more here, but I really kind of just looked at it from a perspective of if I'm new to this, I'm going to change. What are some of the things that I want to keep in mind as we're designing this kind of new strategy, new solution? Excuse me. Number one is the company's visibility to device health from anywhere, right? That's that outside the four walls perspective. Like we talked about originally, the whole credential stuffing or credential harvesting, that everything's on the dark web now. If you reduce password reuse, you have a little bit more control. And the idea there is to actually not even increase password reuse, but centralize the security domain so you have more control over more things. Excuse me, one second. I get emotional about this. The one thing I think I didn't quite hit on that I should have when I talk about identity, one of the pieces of identity is doing what they call SSO, single sign-on, where once you have identity controlled, you start to extend that out to cloud services and other things, so that you you're centralizing that security domain, which makes managing users a lot easier. In some cases, even provisioning, because they'll auto provision into those cloud apps. If they support that, there's kind of a bunch of ways a software vendor can implement single sign-on. And I know for us, our goal is to kind of get more into that. So if somebody leaves the organization, we have one place to disable their account, and then it disables it everywhere, and we're really confident that's happening. So the next piece is standardize the computer configurations, evaluate user and device risk when accessing digital assets. Now, this kind of comes into that extending, because the digital assets may be in M365 or they may be in some other software, but that's that idea of single sign-on and extending that goodness out. And when you extend that out, you get all the behavior, all of that identity piece stays within Microsoft, so all the telemetry is there too. Now the next few here are ones we haven't really talked about, but are actually benefits to this as we start to move into this direction. Is reduce user downtime when replacing machines, and we'll kind of talk about what that means in a minute. Improve user experience when troubleshooting. Again, we'll talk about that in a minute. And then improve user sign-in experience while increasing security. That's more of that extending that identity out, because I don't need to know 100 different passwords. In fact, I may not even need to remember my password at all if I do this right. So this is, and I stole this right from Microsoft, because they do a really good job of articulating, at least their strategy, but in general, zero trust architecture strategy. And as you see on the left here, identities and devices, foundation, we're moving through. And we kind of talked about data, apps, infrastructure, and network. We haven't really talked about. That's more of that legacy, but bringing some of that zero trust philosophy into those. Then the easy one as an example there is network segmentation. Don't just have a flat network. Start segmenting things. Make sure that your backups are segmented from everything else. So if a user is compromised, they can't delete your backups. Those type of things. That's really what in the zero trust architecture, when we talk about networking, means. But when we look at identities, we have number one, multi-factor. When we look at devices, it's inventory. If we look at CIS controls, the number one thing on there is know what you have. So inventory your hardware devices. And number two happens to be software, inventory all your software. So back to the framework, this is how the framework and the the architecture kind of fit together, and you know that you're on the right track, right? Okay. Any questions on, so if we're thinking about this, we've been very conceptual. We started getting a little bit of logical and how this works. Now we're going to get into kind of the physical aspect of it, some bits and bytes on configurations, and I kind of walk through that. Any questions before we dive into the next piece of this? Okay. Don't be shy. It's okay. I appreciate it. All right. So now we're getting into, I started with configuration policy. You could argue which one you want to start with, but configuration policy really says, here's how I want to configure my devices, and think of it as a replacement for your group policy in what Microsoft labels as the legacy world. Microsoft says that it's feature parity. I think there's a lot of argument over that. I would say, for the most part, from an SMB perspective, it's going to have most of what you want there, but there might be some gaps still. So I don't want to sell it as the panacea. It solves everything. You can just migrate your group policies over. There's some work to be done there in translation. So, I see Ryan shaking his head. I get it. But there is a lot of options here, and a lot of real good options. The thing I want to call out, see if I can do this, use technology here, is there's 278 and policies here, and they're linked to, these are all settings, and then oops, there we go. Computer configuration and user configuration. That looks fairly familiar if you're familiar with how Active Directory and group policy work. It's very similar to how those were configured, or at least laid out. So there's a familiarity in how this is translating at least a little bit. This is an example of a baseline. What we've done internally and for a lot of our clients is we've created a baseline. This is the Windows 10 baseline security settings. This is influenced from CIS controls and from the Windows security baseline for Windows 10 security baseline. You're only seeing a piece of this because it's long, but this is what it looks like when you've created the policy. The other one was all the options for a policy. This is actually creating the policy. So if you look at the top here, see if I can use my Zoom again. We've named the policy. You could add a description, assignments, so who it applies to, what groups, and then lastly here, these are some examples of the configurations. And again, this meets that inside the four walls and outside the four walls, because it's a cloud service that it's syncing up to. It doesn't matter where it's at. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about the compliance policy. So compliance policy is really, taking your identities and your devices and make sure they're configured as intended. So you're getting kind of alerts, you're getting telemetry to say, hey, something's not right here. One of the misconceptions is that compliancy policies take action. They really don't do much besides evaluate. There's another policy that's the actionable. So let's look at the compliance policy first, and then we'll get to the actionable. And I know we're going through a lot. We're almost at the end here. If the way this is laid out, I basically took on the left side it's kind of the whole policy, and then I zoomed in. If you kind of see the red line here, that's kind of the area I'm zooming into, and this is just giving you an example of what we have access to here. We can, evaluate if BitLocker's on, if the device is encrypted, OS version, some of the security settings. We can, password expiration, those types of things. We can evaluate a bunch of things all the way down to the, device security, firewall, the TPM chip, antivirus, and so on. These are things that, as the device reports in, we can say, hey, are these things working right? And if not, then use a conditional access policy to take action. And if you're running Defender, you have some more options within the Defender here, and Defender for endpoint also. So now we've kind of defined the initial policy. So we have, you know, how we want machines to be configured. We have some reporting basically set up so that the compliance policy will tell us if something's not configured the way we hoped. And then the conditional access policy is really how you start to take action on that. This is where you allow or deny based on those criteria. And so I put a little bit in here for some good practices. Essentially this, and I'm not going to read them verbatim to you, but essentially the idea here is you don't want too many of these. These can get out of control pretty quickly. So you want them very concise. You know, if you, in most organizations, if you have more than 10 or 15, you probably have too many, or probably should have a really good reason to have more than that. So that's kind of what we're saying here. And then really it's just around, you know, some of the, well, what should you start with? Well, one is confirm user identity and during sign-in. Well, yeah, that's fits with the zero trust framework and all that. Back to also the framework and the philosophy that layers in with it. So let's take a look at what an organization might look like for conditional access. I'm not going to go too deep. Again, Ryan, chime in if you have some questions, or anybody, not just Ryan, but Ryan specifically, since this was kind of your question. If I look at the naming scheme number one, if you saw that in the good practices, the naming scheme here. So we know which ones are blocking or denying, and we know which ones are granting access. So we kind of know the purpose of it. So naming scheme matters. Just be really descriptive in it. And then like some examples of what this could look like is when you create a new policy, these are your options. So I can zoom in here a little bit. So I can name the policy, right? I can add users to it. And this was kind of, I forget whether this came up, but the cloud apps, like you can start to separate how the policy or what that policy applies to. You can do all apps, you can do selective apps. So you can, if a particular policy is too restrictive for that app, you can kind of set another policy according to that app. And I'm going to call out one thing here. So most of, you know, at the beginning, I think I mentioned, you know, when we're looking at things here, we're predominantly Microsoft M365 Business Premium is a licensing SKU. A lot of this depends on what licensing you have. I've tried to narrow the talk down to what's included in that. But this one thing is definitely not included in that, and that is these top two right here. So the user risk and the sign-in risk. This is an add-on. You need your Azure Active Directory Plan 2 to get the access to take action on this telemetry. I believe it's still in Plan 1, but you can't take action on it. These options aren't even there if you don't have Plan 2. So you need to, if you have M365 Business Premium, you need to add on either Plan 2 individually or EMS like E5 or something like that that includes Plan 2. So just a call out there when we're looking at this. But again, this is the conditional access policy. So we're starting to understand, okay, we can assign users to this, we can assign cloud applications, we can, and we're on the conditions right now. So we can, you know, if we have the right licensing, risk assessments and actions, device platforms, locations. So we can say, oh, and I think this is, I'll reserve. There's an argument for this, but this is a good example of the location. I don't know if I would do it. You can say if you're in the office coming from these IPs, you can say don't prompt for MFA or that type of stuff. So that's part of that location based. You could go the other way. You could say If you're not coming from a North American-based IP, you can't log in. So if you're outside the US, you can't log in, right? So those are some of the, if I'm looking at the locations, what we can do, the geographic thing, aspect of it. Client apps and device state. So client apps are basically the browser, like Outlook, those types of things. So we can configure all of these conditional access policies based on kind of all of those criteria. And we can get pretty granular. That's why you want to be cautious about how deep you can get this. The other thing I want to call out here specifically, be very careful. Do not go in here and play. If you go in here and play, there will be lots of messages that say, do not lock yourself out. You can lock yourself out of your tenancy with this. You can lock everyone out of your tenancy with this. So be very careful. And I've never done it, so I don't know how you get it unlocked. I assume it's like a walk of shame where you have to call Microsoft and be like, help. I don't know. I don't know how you get out of it if you lock yourself out. But if you're going through this, there's lots of warnings. The number one way you can not lock yourself out and see what happens is use this report only. So you can create the policy, set it at report only. It won't take action. It will just tell you, what it would have done or what it would have applied to, which is really helpful. Then you can see if you're going to lock yourself out. Okay. Any questions so far? I got a couple more things and then we'll be wrapping up. Okay. So the next one, I think this is a newer feature. At least it's newer to me. I didn't notice these until the last few months here. I don't remember when I saw them, but they're fairly new to me. These are templated policies, and these are really nice. All the stuff we just went through, somewhat confusing, not sure. You kind of have to be experienced and play around to make it work. These are all set up for exactly what they say. Now, still be careful about who you apply it to and how you apply it. But the one I wanted to call out here is protect administrator. These are all really good to do, and I would highly recommend enabling these. Not blanket, don't lock yourself out, but work through the process of enabling these safely. When you think about require multi-factor, it makes a lot of sense. Legacy auth is a big one. You want to make sure legacy auth is really off everywhere, but disabling it for your admins for sure. Require the multi-factor for Azure management, where it's not about risk, it's just always prompting you. Require compliant, here I'm moving along here, require compliant or hybrid Azure AD joined device for admins is kind of what Ryan was talking about a little bit, is the device has to be joined and managed in a certain way so that it can, and you can make it fairly binary. Is it managed by us? Yes. Okay, then it can sign in. You can make it granular. Like, is it managed by us? Is it encrypted? Does it have all the update? Blah blah blah. You can do a lot of criteria for that. And then require phishing resistant multi-factor authentication for admins. That makes a lot of sense. You don't want your admins getting phished, right? Hopefully your admins aren't checking email on their admin account, but we can talk about that if they are. So kind of back to the design goal. So when we think about design goal, if we look at the first 4 of these, we've kind of hit that, right? If we've applied these policies, we're improving visibility, we're reducing password reuse, we're standardizing computer configurations, and we're evaluating users and devices risk when they access digital assets. But the other one, then the last one too, sorry, a little bit out of order, the sign-in experience. But the 2 we're not really accomplishing quite yet is the downtime when you're replacing a machine. Everybody hates the machine get replaced. You gotta put all your apps on it. You gotta get it back to the way you like it. Now, we can't solve all of it, but we can solve pieces of that. And same thing with the troubleshooting. A lot of times, because of the pain in switching machines, you troubleshoot things probably a little bit too long, where if you would have just reloaded the machine and it would fix a bunch of stuff, right? So the thing that I want to talk about here is autopilot. Now, autopilot's a component of this, and you can do a lot of what I just talked about in Intune or Endpoint Manager without having autopilot at all. You can, as a device connects, you can deploy software. You can, deploy the configurations. You can do a lot of that within what we've already talked about, and then in Intune from a deployment perspective. So I'll give you an example. If you handed me a machine, I could log into that machine and all this stuff would deploy. You wouldn't have to do it as a employee or a IT support person. You wouldn't have to deploy the machine like we do today. Have to open the box, sign in, get all the software installed, get it all configured, and then hand it to the user, and then kind of transfer things over. What autopilot? So in that case, before we get to autopilot, in that scenario, the biggest thing that is still a gap is if any user can sign into any machine, then any machine can be part of my environment, right? That's the biggest gap, and that's where autopilot kind of comes in and helps solve that. And so, as an example, if I if I'm out of town or traveling and my machine dies, and I go to Best Buy, buy a new machine, assuming it has all the right OS and everything on it, I can just sign into that machine, into my tenancy, and it would deploy everything to it. That's probably a good example of how the way this works would be good, right? If I'm missing a machine, I can go get one. What's bad is if I have a home machine or my kid's machine that is virus ridden, I can still attach that to our organization and get access to digital assets. The assumption there is hopefully you're deploying proper security to it, but I'll tell you, as a leader in our organization, I don't want to know what's going on in my employees' home machines. Don't want to. I don't want that visibility. So, in our journey through this, we've made some of these mistakes, which is why I'm kind of pointing some of these things out. When you go to this, the autopilot is kind of, like I said, that bookend to control. If a device is in autopilot, only that device can connect to your organization, and you can set it up through your distribution, or when you buy machines, you can get a file, and I'll kind of show you a little bit of that to then import your devices, so that when you send it out to a person, it can't be attached to another network. It only is attached to your environment and will log in with, and you can even set it to users, and we can look at that too. But hopefully I kind of did an okay job of explaining the issues that we have without autopilot, and as we start to go through it, kind of keep those things in mind as we go through this. All right. What we're looking at here is the autopilot screen. So when we import devices, now these devices could come from our distribution, or we can import them ourselves. These devices are hardware tied to our organization, so you can't just go sign into another organization with that device. You have to get it out of here to even do that. So talk about device control, or if we're looking at CIS controls, now we have a really clear understanding of what hardware assets can connect to our organization because they're in here, right? The other thing we can do is we can tie a device to a user, so when that user tries to log in, it's kind of a custom view for that user. Their username pops up, they log in, and they have a really good out-of-box experience. Again, because we're doing this, that user can't go to their home machine if their machine goes down and log into their home machine, make that part of our network, and get access, right? This is that key to locking them out. This is the option. I'll zoom in here. This is the key option for that. Personally owned devices, block. That's what locks you into autopilot and creates this. When you think about the walled garden, it's expanded that garden to the world, but now you have control over what devices connect pretty explicitly. And then I threw in an example just so you can see. You create, just like with anything, a profile. There's a profile that goes with the autopilot deployment profile, it's called. And this is where you would configure the out-of-box experience. So when someone gets the device, what is their experience? One thing I want to point out here, and I see if I can find it here real quick. I think it's here, this one. We ran into some issues, just the quality of life. When we first set up all of our apps to be deployed, and we set them up so that when someone logs in, it deploy the time it took at the login screen or the deployment screen was significant. It was like anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on what was going on. And the main problem we ran into was that if there was an error, it failed the whole thing, and we had to kind of go back from the beginning. And the error could have been like, oh, there's a blip in the internet, and one of the apps didn't come down. So we kind of changed our philosophy on that. Is we have some apps that are required, but they're very few, and we really just let them go past, because we found that if we just let the device deploy, it still gets registered. It's still part of your management. You still have that visibility to it, but then the applications will deploy in the background, and it's just a much easier experience for the user. And now, kind of coming back to our design goal, one of them is deployment, but one of them is troubleshooting. So this has also allowed us to troubleshoot a little easier. So if someone's working in Florida and having a problem with their machine, we can confidently remotely wipe that machine and have it redeploy remotely without having any admin access to it whatsoever. So it's really nice from a troubleshooting perspective. We've reduced our troubleshooting time quite a bit. If there's something going on, like it's taking too much CPU or something's going on, and we're just not really figuring it out, one of the first steps is we'll just wipe it, they log in, everything kind of comes back. They're connected to OneDrive and all the M365 goodness, so that all syncs up pretty seamlessly. So the settings here that we're looking at, block device use until all apps and profiles are installed. This isn't something you just go set up and deploy. You're going to do a lot of testing. I would test this quite a bit and make sure that you know how this works. But if you're getting people stuck, or if the deployments are getting stuck, this is one way to kind of get past it and create a little bit better experience. Okay. Ooh, right at noon. Oh man, I'm sorry. Last slide. Again, a lot of what I focused on was in that M365 Business Premium SKU. I didn't want to get into a whole bunch of other licensing. There's more add-ons that we can kind of amp this up, when we look at that journey and we look at, automations and rights management. There's a bunch of things we can do to add on to these functions. But hopefully I gave you a real clear sense of kind of the state of the state, what Zero Trust is, how that plugs into the a framework that you're using, and then some of the tools in M365 and some considerations there. Sorry, I went over by a minute. I know, Katie, you wanted to talk real quick, but I'll stay on for a few more minutes if someone has questions after Katie announces some winners.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. So we do have our giveaway winners picked. So the winner of our headset is Jen Bockham-Gatsky. Cody Frank is the winner of our keyboard, and Brenda McCullough won our speakerphone. So I will be emailing you with instructions on how to claim those prizes. So be on the lookout for that. And then just one more thing, if you liked today's content and you want to learn more about a topic that Brandon mentioned at the beginning, which is cyber insurance, we will be having a cyber insurance Dine and Dash event at the end of May, on May 23rd at McCormick and Schmick's. And instructions on how to register will be on our website next week. So stay tuned for more information on that. Like Brandon said, he'll hang around and answer some questions if you have any. Otherwise, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. Thank you for joining us.
Brandon, I would ask, you talked about the sign-on, making it an easy, pleasurable experience for the users. This may be a standard answer for you, but what about password keepers, security around the password keeper stuff?
Yeah, so kind of referring to like the LastPass breach and like the password managers, is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, like 1Password, I think is a new one out there. I don't know if it's new or not. I was reading up on it, and I'm hearing different folks say, well, yeah, I use it, it's going to be secure, but other people say, hey, anything in the cloud is, a target.
Yep. Yeah, and so they're not wrong. And so I kind of come back to that risk management piece, right? And there is a real barrier to getting the users to change and the users to adopt things, especially in security. Something like a password manager, if it's not easy to use, the cloud functionality to most password managers, like 1Password or Keeper or even LastPass, is really what makes it usable for the end user, and so which in turn, because they will use it, increases your security posture. So that it's that kind of usability and balance, because if you make it too secure, so a lot of the ones that are coming out now after the LastPass, some of them are touting like, oh, run your own, or run your own server in your own cloud. And I'll tell you, I have no interest in managing that. We have so much in our organizations to pay attention to and care about. I'd rather pay a little bit more for someone to manage my password manager in the cloud properly. I think what we learned from the LastPass breach was I was not one that jumped on the bash LastPass right away. I mean, breaches happen, we get it. It was some of the stuff that came out afterwards and how they handled the breach and how they were securing what they said was zero knowledge and some of the encrypted vaults. Well, then we found out that part of the vaults weren't encrypted. It was only the kind of some of the really sensitive areas that were encrypted. So they still knew what websites that you were in saved in there and all of that. So really kind of poor implementation from LastPass on some of these things. And then again, some of the other ways that they saved passwords and what they were able to get to and what they were able to decrypt. That's where I've really changed my tune with LastPass. But what I think it did in the industry is it really kind of started to define what good vault management looks like. And so I'm not opposed to something being in the cloud. What I am opposed to is somebody improperly securing that in the cloud. So I think we're starting to see that and I'll give you an example. If LastPass would have encrypted all of the vaults 100%, so there was no visibility into what was going on, like what sites, any of the notes, and had a true zero knowledge infrastructure, the breach was kind of moot, right? If you had a good password or if you had, good security. So like as an example, if you extended your Azure AD into that and that secured it through Azure AD, it was very difficult, probably, multiple lifetimes before someone would get into that vault. But they didn't secure it appropriately. So when you look at other password managers, I think we're starting to see what we can measure them against and at least ask some questions about how they secure their vaults. What does zero knowledge really mean to them? And if they can answer those appropriately, I'm more inclined to use the cloud-based ones, whether it's Keeper or 1Pass. Though, again, it's back to the usability and getting my users to use it. So hopefully that answered your question. I know it was a long-winded question, but I hopefully gave you some context to make that decision on.
Yep, thanks.
Martin.
I have a comment, and there's a question kind of embedded in here about device management and application control. When we started going down that path, which was a long time ago, it was a very difficult path. We eased into it, we backed out of it, we eased into it again, backed out. It was just a long time. And one of the things that we ended up with, and it's asking your comments for, was we applied device management to our in the end, we applied device management to our laptops, and we applied application control to our mobile devices. And that was kind of the balance that we finally settled at that allowed us to press through and get a functional policy working that the users could tolerate. And then it was, well, we'll go back and look at it later and try to, you know, refine this and clean it up. And then we never did. Maybe we still will, but it seemed to be the way we could make it work. Any comments, suggestions, or thing to share for others' benefit?
Yeah, it's a really great point, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So what Martin's kind of talking about is a lot of what we talked about today is in Endpoint Manager, which is predominantly MDM, the device management. That is, you take control over the device, you have a lot of visibility, and you have a lot of control over that. What the challenge is when you start to think about mobile devices specifically, most people are bringing their own, and you don't want that total control over it. They don't want it either, right? It's very difficult to convince somebody, at least, you know, even for us, it was difficult to convince people that this is my device, but you're taking full control over it. Where what Martin's talking about is MAM, mobile application management, is another function, and that I think you've done it right. That is the balance I see quite a bit, and what that allows what that allows is that you can kind of draw a line around. Here is all of our, you know, back to the walled garden, right? There, you draw a fence around all of the applications that are business related. So predominantly the M365, Outlook, you know, Teams, you name it, right? And then you can then control those with a lot more granularity, and give access to the digital assets there without having full access to the device. You can wipe them separately, so you don't have to wipe the whole device. You can wipe the just the business data off of it, so you're not, you know, deleting someone's, you know, precious memories, which, you know, gosh, how many times does that happen to people that have left organizations? So I think it's a really great balance. So I think you're doing it right. There is some gap in what control you have over that. So it would be nice over the next, you know, few months or years as Microsoft maybe adds some more there. But the MDM versus MAM is what most organizations do from a mobile device now that I see.
Thank you.
Hey, I got a quick question. I hope
Sure.
it's quick. So in our company, we're sort of a hybrid situation. We've got one server, and then most of everything has been moved to Azure and the cloud. So there's some, from, you know, as far as setting up a lot of these, for instance, most of our devices are Azure AD registered, not joined. So I guess I want to know, like, what can we do? How far can we make some of these, implement some of these things we talked about today, and also not have any sort of conflicts with everything that Success has set up in Enable and things like that? I guess, you know, when I look at these and like, well, can I implement any of these when we're not quite joined?
Yeah, so there are a number of options. There are some limitations too. I think in your setup, the number one thing I would configure it right away when I think about identity and device and the device side of that is you don't have to turn on the full evaluation of the device to still get some confidence. And you can turn on at least it's a device I control. And so that registered allows you to turn on from a conditional access perspective that it's at least a device I control, and then lock other devices out that you don't control. So that would be one step, you know, that you could do without having to kind of get into the granularity of what's supported and what's not. And then over time, we can kind of look at how to, you know, turn the knobs, flip the switches to be a little bit more secure from an evaluation standpoint. That would be the first step I would do, is just start to turn that on from a control perspective. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure does. Thanks.
And you kind of mentioned something there too. We work really hard to look at we're not married to our tools. So like you mentioned, enable. We don't say, well, we have enable, we have to do this through enable. But we look at it from a perspective of kind of with a couple of lenses. One, what's the best tool for the job? What's going to do the best job? And then the other is kind of jobs to be done. So if it's a job that we're going to own, we need visibility to that and insight across a lot of organizations. And so that might tip our favor in one tool or the other. But from a perspective of what do we set our baseline to, we work really hard to look at it from a perspective of enable's really good at X, and we want to make sure that that happens, and then we don't duplicate it in the baselines for that we configure for M365. So we work really hard to keep those balanced, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's something I just want to make sure we're not duplicating things or making it so where updates can't get pushed because some other things have been configured on one end and not the other. So appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Happy to stay on a little longer and answer. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I think we'll end it. Katie, I'm not sure. Is there anything else you wanted to jump in and say?
No, all good. You can,
all right.
you can go ahead and hop off. Thank you, Brandon.
All right.
Great today.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Yeah. Have a good one. Bye.